Okay.
You guys can go ahead and chat.
Okay, fantastic. Andrew, tell you what, let's start off. Since a lot of people don't know you, I had the good gift of actually knowing you prior to this event.
Right.
And the blog you write and some of the information you have and your kind of area of expertise and what you actually bring to this convention and the ideas you put forth today.
First of all, as the oldest person attending this convention, I bring a lot of wisdom and experience, obviously,
right.
And also because of my research into, as I said in my presentation, my path has been. I knew I was going to be dating again after my second marriage ended, and I wanted to learn as much as I possibly could, and I went down a rabbit hole, in effect. And I'm a very logical, research-based guy. That all my friends and the one I'm currently dating laughs when I talk about statistics, and surveys and all that kind of stuff, and they're just like, oh God. But I'm passionate about that. I'm really passionate about that.
Okay. And this rabbit hole, it's a euphemism for a thought process of where rational behavior is observed.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Rather than just sort of propaganda and what we've been taught and led to believe. And that's typically what we associate based on the movie The Matrix, red pill and blue pill.
Yeah, red pill, blue pill. And I'm kind of all over that concept, almost exclusively via the internet. And I think that a lot of the attendees here also have some degree of awareness regarding that.
Right.
And so I kind of bring, an online digital element from sort of the internet and bringing it down here.
Right.
You've got, the red pill. We have the manosphere, the loose collection of blogs, bulletin boards, and various websites that talk about men's issues.
Right.
And some of the guys here knew about it, and a lot of them didn't, which is fine. I mean,
right.
We get information one way, through a variety of sources. And so that's kind of what I'm bringing is a conceptual overview of how humans behave.
Okay.
Simple as that. And then the individual coaches, of course, and the advisors, they talk about more specific things.
Right. And not only that, they offer a number of different programs to respond to that. But when we talk about it, you're talking about the biological research, the theoretical patterning of behavior, the stuff that we see in anthropology, human evolutionary type stuff, cultural evolution. And you've got a background, interesting enough, in cultural geography. Which is actually a rarity. It's interesting that it's one of the rare people I actually sit and say, okay, I've heard of the term before, but
it's a subset of geography. Geography is not just maps and state capitals. Geography, as one of my professors said, is the why of where. Okay. Simple as that. So I learned about how agriculture developed in human society based on the geography of where it happened.
Gotcha.
So we're talking about hydraulic cultures, rivers,
right,
stuff like that. And it was a fascinating class. I took several of them.
So you actually have a really good, solid academic kind of background for this sort of studying, reading, research material, and you have a natural, relatively professional interest in, or at least a professional training background for a lot of this information.
Yeah, I do. I'm not. No, my degree is a minor league degree. But I did go to a very good school that is renowned for its geography school, for its geography department, and I'm very glad. And then I did my graduate work to get a teaching certificate of all things. So I'm a licensed school teacher.
Nice. So you know how to speak, and that definitely played out in your presentation.
Right, and that's a very important part is the ability to present well. And it's always good to see somebody who speaks well in public. Didn't come naturally to me. I had to learn it.
Yeah, well, what I find is it's a skill, and it doesn't matter what skill it is. It has to be taught, and it has to be practiced and trained to for competency.
Right. So. Right, and then and I think for the pickup guys, I don't think they spend enough attention on a guy's voice. I think that is an extremely important part about it. But that's a whole different sort of skill set. That can be related to the pickup scene, but having a good voice, loud enough, not too loud, well measured, without too many vocalized interruptions, makes a very big difference on how people perceive you.
Right, and we, for example, in a lot of the pickup or the dating type stuff where we talk about engaging people socially, we talk about body language tells, leaning to and pecking or, those sort of things. We focus in on that, but we don't pay attention to our raising voice and anxiety and slowing things down, our tempo, our tonality, and that sort of stuff. And the quote from the film crew literally is like, we just said it earlier, is audio is 80% of what you see.
Yeah,
and I thought it was kind of an interesting thing on that.
The power of the voice is quite remarkable. And there are speech coaches.
Well, you look at any famous actors, whether it's Morgan Freeman or James Earl Jones, you just sit down and go, powerful, rich voices really kind of matter as far as, conveying a lot of sense of that, and in particular masculine voice, you sit down and say there's an element to that. So, and yes, you're right. I don't know of a single coach that really kind of sits down and teaches that.
Because it is a very, very different skill set. I recommend for folks also, guys, drama class, community theater.
Okay. Yeah.
Because it really forces a guy to work on his delivery and his presentation so that he doesn't come across flat.
Yeah, and I've seen guys take impromptu stuff, where they literally learn to ad lib or.
Yeah, well, I do that now.
Yeah, and to be able to think on their feet and be creative.
Yeah, improv.
Yep, improv.
Improv is a very good skill to have. The thing is that it's a lot of this stuff takes time and effort.
Right. Well, and I don't know of a skill that's worthwhile that doesn't take effort. I'm never impressed by a child or an adult who's said, I learned this skill when I was 5, and I don't need to learn anymore, or particularly their educational system. It's like, I don't know how many 5-year-olds I'm really getting wisdom to. Now a child's insight for stepping out of the box or kind of speaking a plain truth without social interruption, that I get. But to sit down and talk about profound decisions or skill sets, I don't listen to teenagers either.
Nor do I. And I'm also a little suspicious of anybody who makes outlandish claims that they can fix a guy's problems just like that.
Right.
That is definitely a definite problem. It's because there are no magic pills. There's no magic beans. And it takes hard work and things like that. But I think the guys here have a really good conception of that.
Right.
And of course the professional guys.
Plane coming in.
We are definitely in scenic Miami, looking by the airport. Good times were had by all.
What are the odds of that door opening when the 737's coming in at 100
It's like, welcome
feet?
to Miami, come for the conference, stay for the Zika.
Hey, but with the hurricane, we got a spread now.
Oh, God.
Nobody wants to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about.
This is hashtag Florida trouble.
Well, and speaking of that, you don't want to see the Department of Homeland Security sprayers are out, like in Central Florida. They're particularly going to the neighborhood spraying. They were literally worried about it. So you start seeing that taking place with that public awareness. I'm surprised that hasn't spiked yet. But
This is Florida problems.
thank God for the election to cover that. Everyone's focusing on the election and nobody's worried.
Speaking of that, I'm actually very glad that the presentations I've seen so far are not political.
To be really honest, it's typical here. There's political beliefs. It tends to be a lot more libertarian and conservative, relatively conservative. Ayn Rand objectivist type conservatism. But as far as straight up politics, there's not a whole lot of room for that.
Right.
And because it's so inflammatory. The other thing I find really fascinating, and you were witness to it. Actually, you were right in between it. Actually, there was a sincere disagreement between Brent Smith and James Marshall.
Yeah.
And how much hostility did you see there?
None.
Not only that, both men listen, and that is something you see here. So, and people don't realize on occasions different speakers have different ideas or different belief systems, but they come together and communicate, and there really is that sort of discussion. When people are saying, we need to have a discussion, usually it says you need to shut up and listen, and you don't have that here.
It's interesting. I've been asked about by several people over the years. Because there are all these various dating coaches. We have James is here. We've got a couple others, and I was asked very specifically and very recently. How do these guys differentiate themselves? And I'm still trying to figure that out, by the way, because I am not in the business. I am not a professional dating coach. I have a regular full-time job with benefits and a 401k plan, and so I'm not. I have no financial skin in this game, so to speak. Mm-hmm. I do this because I'm enthusiastic about the topic, and I want to share information. Simple as that.
Yep.
And I'll find out on my own. I'll probably be asking some folks tonight or tomorrow, saying, okay, what makes you different than you? What makes RSD, Real Social Dynamics, with the infamous, what's his name? Julian Blanc. Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
I went older school. They were the founders. Sorry.
And so what is or Love Systems or any other guy who's pitching a system or one-on-one coaching? I would like to know what differentiates you in a very competitive marketplace. I mean, this is You know, a lot of people are getting into it, and for good reason. There's a demand for it. I can certainly see that, but I argue that human behavior is predictable, right?
Right.
Okay, based on that, then the content of all these guys should be very similar.
You would think, but the coaching and the instruction isn't. So it's like, what separates one university from another? Is every English department the same across the board?
All right, I can see that. Excuse
You
me.
know, and in particular, you know, for example, you also have guys looking at different market sectors. You know, so
Right.
Brent Smith typically ends up dealing, let's say he's teaching the same stuff, and he isn't, at a very different class level, you know, of clientele type, and caters to that clientele than, say, another organization.
Okay.
And so you see that. You'll also start to see what we find is a level of professionalism is starting to differentiate certain organizations.
Right, and people.
And you'll start seeing that more and more. And the internet is really kind of becoming open with responses. If you have bad reviews, bad reputations, you don't last.
That's,
where 10
that's-
years ago, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
You didn't have that.
And I have a rule of thumb, you know, that I advise people is that, you know, if the dating coach hasn't been in business more than 3 years, be very suspicious. If they've been in business more than 7 years, probably doing something right.
Yep.
You know, because it is a very competitive business, and also the same applies for the dating coaches for the female side of the equation.
Yeah.
Which is actually a bigger market, and I've actually been in touch with quite a few of these people.
I hate to say it, that is a larger market, and more money is sitting there. And we've actually had one come in and talk before he was actually talking, you know, specifically targeting that. But they were literally discussing attendee numbers and stuff like that. Is staggering.
Yeah.
Absolutely staggering.
Yeah, and I think that what the men do is it's interesting because if you know the self-help book industry is huge, and you go to a Barnes and Noble, you put the last one left, or a Books A Million, whatever, and in the self-help section, and it's big, and it's all for women. With the exception for men, it'll be like exercising and maybe diet, but there's none of the sort of stuff they have for women. And men go to the internet. I know that I've gotten over the years quite a few emails from guys saying thank you very much. I was kind of embarrassed. I didn't know that other people were looking for help like this, and I'm very encouraged. And I think that's it just goes to show masculine behavior. You know, we're supposed to be strong, independent. We're supposed to be self-reliant, resilient. We don't need any outside help, so to speak.
Well, I also think you have culture indoctrinating a lot of inferences, not only in publications like in magazines and self-help, you know, where they're constantly inundated, to the movies, to the TV shows, that they're getting the message that they want to hear.
Yeah.
It's an echo chamber. I don't think it's good advice, but they're constantly getting, you're good enough where you are. You have, you know, fat shaming is bad and all those sort of things. And so, you know, why would you think you have to change? One of the biggest things I've even seen, I've got friends, or I say friends, I follow a number of people I've known, associates that I normally would have just dumped on Facebook, just to monitor what the hell they're doing, because they're such classic examples of social failures. They've done nothing. They keep going through relationship after relationship after relationship, and this, you know, literally this next guy who's, you know, 3 times convicted felon, just out, and he's going to turn his life around, and he's such a sweet guy, and he's going to, you know, he's going to become the next rising star in MMA, and he's 35. You know, in a 22, 23-year-old, you know, you just, you know, profession, you just sit there and go, you're out of your mind. And oh, and by the way, 4 weeks later when he's hitting her, just doesn't understand why.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
so-
there is the, you know, I had a word for it. I don't know what word. Oh, I call it emotional pornography.
Yes, yes.
Okay, and emotional pornography is one of my first blog posts that I wrote back in 2011, and it's fairly easy to define. It's setting up false expectations for relationships, or false expectations about romance. So we talk about the romance industry all the time. It's huge. I actually had a couple of dates with a romance author.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
She had specialized in a particular niche, but it was very interesting. 50% of all paperback books sold are romances.
Right. Yeah.
50%. Okay, so we have this emotional pornography that's circulating. Are you familiar with the screenwriter Nora Ephron?
Sounds real familiar.
When Harry Met Sally?
Yes, there you go.
Sleepless in Seattle?
Mhm.
You've
Got it.
Got Mail?
Okay. Yep.
Every cutesy Meg
Got it.
Ryan movie
Okay.
out there. And she recently passed away, but she was doing more to ruin relationship expectations than anybody else, because we go to see these romantic comedies and we think this is how life should be, and it's not like that whatsoever. You know, and I talked about in my presentation, you know, where we have certain behavioral traits that are inherited that can't be overwritten.
Right, it's genetic. And I know in my speech I specifically was talking about how the mammalian brain formulates, and that's where the emotional and motivation center is. And women's neurosynapses are actually structured and hardwired more rapidly to work in that dynamic. It's one of the reasons why they're nurturing and supportive, and that would have been a biological response to, your graph of human evolution and time period of hunting and gathering and all those sort of things, and why women invented planting and seeding, because the guys were out, literally didn't have time to sit and do that, and were not going to see the benefits of seed strawberry growth.
Right.
So you sit down and see that and notice that response. And women are prone to emotionally dealing. We're visually based. We have to spot danger, which is the same thing where I was literally talking why guys see G-sized tits wiggling, and you can't find visual capture as opposed to emotional capture. And so for me, knowledge is that there's understanding in the knowledge. And so you once you have that knowledge, you can start to understand the solutions because it almost presents itself. It doesn't take a whole lot more, and I can be more empathetic for it.
It's interesting because there's a dating coach out there, based out in Los Angeles, called Evan Mark Katz. And he's a very clever fellow. He's very good at what he does. And what part of his curriculum is educating women about men, because men are visual, and we've got certain behaviors that in modern society are not appropriate, but will be perfectly appropriate in a hunter-gatherer society. And we are visual capture. I like that term. We look at young, attractive women.
Yeah.
This is what we do.
And it's our lizard brain. Yeah. It's the same brain structure that every vertebrate has. Yeah. Literally every, and not just mammal, vertebrate. So it's reptilian in nature.
Yeah.
And it's the oldest, 500 million years old in evolutionary development. It's been responsive. And the other thing I find terribly fascinating is both the hindbrain, the lizard brain, and the mammalian complex, the middle brain, will actually start to neurologically shut down the cerebral cortex, the rational brain.
Interesting.
So what you end up having is the irrational parts of our brain, the hindbrain and the middle brain, literally shutting down the rational component. Right. So you don't think rationally. Yep. And if you're dealing with that and don't have a way or conditioning or trained yourself to resist that sort of behavior, you're going to be subject to it.
Well, I'm friendly with a neurobiologist out of Southeastern University. Her name is Dawn Maslin. Nice woman. We've gone back and forth. I think we've talked on the phone. And she says that being in love is like being on drugs.
Oh, it absolutely is.
because your rational brain shuts down.
Nick Sparks talked about that. Where he was literally talking about not just the shutting down, but the flooding of chemicals, oxytocin, dopamine, all those sort of chemical industrial. These are the same ones people are getting on chemical highs.
Yeah.
That cocaine releases, that heroin releases. And you sit down and say it's very, very possible to become love addicted to the neurological responses to it, and you almost kind of wonder, again, people who are they say they quote love addicted, they're compensating for a lack of connection. I've never seen anybody love addicted that was in a healthy, loving relationship because they're getting it. It's always a coping mechanism for a lack of attachment, social isolation, and those sort of things.
Right.
And to kind of understand that nature of it, if you don't understand the nature of it, you can never resolve the problem. And so, you start looking at that and understanding that issue. It's again,
there's new studies. We've got new sensing technology to look at the brain in more detail. Now, it's interesting because it's very controversial when you start studying the differences between a man's brain and a woman's brain. It brings out the blank slaters. Who think that all human behavior is
a construct.
Is a construct. Is a social construct. So it gets, and I've read quotes from relatively well-known sort of sociologists, not scientists per se, but sociologists, saying, "Why are we even studying this?"
Right.
It's like, don't study that. And it's becoming clearer and clearer. I say to my website, I say different. Men and women are different.
Well, and what I find is, again, they're shutting down the communication. Science is never resolved. It's always open for retesting, and that's the part of the scientific basis, is the ability to retest old assumptions. And it's only resolved if you continue to test and have the same assumptions. And when you don't control the variables, like, for example, the publications, you talked about that, when you have articles being written or papers being written on polling data, and we know that's notoriously bad. I answered a question in an audience member literally to that. where they're saying it's like, I don't know the study you read, I can't reference it, but I would go back and read the paper. What was the study like? How accurate was it?
What's the
was
methodology?
Was it really a study? And who? And then, like you're saying, who was funding that?
Advocacy research.
Yeah.
So, but again, this stuff is coming out, and I think that the blank slaters, are going to be, their voices are going to be muted more and more because the science is very clear and becoming clearer.
Well, and my thing is, I think people want to be happy. It's like, for example, I gave up a while back with the men's rights organization. Not so much I was just giving it up, but I was focusing on other things because what I found is I didn't want to be opposed to or fight something. I was rather focused on living and thriving, and by example, you'll gather more followers, and people will look your way by success rather than trying to combat something. Because at a certain point, nobody wants to hear their argument, and I think intuitively everybody knows that it's an African saying that when elephants fight, it's the grass that gets trampled, and nobody wants to live in a house with fighting elephants.
It's interesting though that when I first started my blog back in 2011, the day after Valentine's Day, by the way, is that I had some fairly inflammatory posts because I was still getting my sense and my rhythm and what I was going to be covering. So back in 2011, 2012, I had some pretty inflammatory posts, and I said some bad shit about women. I did. I generalized negatively. Okay, those posts always got the most traffic.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. No, and that's I was always taught there's if you ever want to become famous, the easiest and fastest way you can become famous is throw a brick through a window.
Yeah.
You just have to know what brick through what window to throw.
Right.
And society, unfortunately, is a glass house.
Yeah, I know that's very true. And so there are some of my blogging peers. I mean, they're known for being just real tough, and they get a lot of hate mail. They get a lot of haters, and I'm kind of lucky. I don't get a lot of haters.
Well, it drives traffic. Let's really be honest. And if it drives traffic, there's a business model attached to it.
Right, and again, because I'm not making any money from this, I have a donate button. That's it.
Yeah, I don't even have that.
And I've done some one-on-one stuff via Skype in the past, but that's. It was the exception more than the rule.
Right.
Now that I'm working full time again, it's just like, well, I got to work full time. It's one of the reasons I got here yesterday and not the day before. I got a full time gig, and like I said, I could be making money, I suppose, but I don't think I have the personality, and frankly, I think it's a younger man's game. I really do.
And see, this is where I would actually disagree with you. I think in which the industry has been focused on younger men. I think there's a huge market out there that's not tapped. Guys that are socially isolated.
Yeah.
Guys who are hurt. Your experience is not uncommon. And to sit down and say that there's a lot of men who look at it and go, I'm not going to go back and do a young man's game. I'm not going to go out and peacock and tell super stories and run cubes on 40-year-old women. I mean, now,
ironically, it probably work better.
It really does. And the other thing is, and here's the other one is shades of gray. I can remember, and this is going to sound really horrible. We went to a bar that actually was an outdoor bar, but across the way was a movie theater, and all these women are going to see this movie, and we would just literally almost be kind of rude, just sit down and just as a social experiment, just tell them no or whatever it was. Yeah. And no woman likes to be told no, but my God, these women go in snarling at us, come back out, and just were wrapping themselves around her finger with saying no.
Yeah.
It's like, why are your panties on? Yeah. And they're like, what? And like, go to the bathroom and take them off. And it's like, I'm not doing that. And you just back turn, like, shh. Actions, not words. And back turn. I did it as a fucking joke. And I'm thinking that she's going to pop her clutch open when she comes back because she left, and we're like, oh my God, she's going. And going right to the bathroom, it's like, holy shit, she's doing it. And she comes back, and instead of just like popping it, she comes out and just drops it on the table.
Perfect.
I just say, have a seat.
Well, if you read the book A Billion Wicked Thoughts by David Buss and another guy whose name escapes me, you'll see that the one thing that women respond to more than anything else, it's like a 100% response rate, is a positively sexual response rate, is dominance.
Yes, and in your talk, go into that because you were explaining the difference between dominance and domineering.
Okay, first of all,
world of difference.
Okay, now the problem with the English language is it's very hard. The English language is very limited. I'm sure there's some fancy long German word that would cover this immediately, but Germans have a word for everything.
Yeah, if not, they just start combining.
They just take right. Yeah. Well, we don't have that luxury in the English language. So, women respond positively sexually to dominance, but the problem is it's too close to domineering.
Right.
And so it has a negative connotation. Now, technically speaking, it shouldn't have a negative connotation, but the reality on the ground is when you say dominant, he's a real dominant dude, it has more of a negative connotation based on the context, of course. So that's why I like the word leadership. And so there are other words in the English language that describe seduction and courtship and all that just aren't quite spot on. And our language just doesn't cover the nuances, doesn't cover the thorough connotations. So dominance, yes, women respond to dominance. But I'd like to say leadership instead.
Okay. The other one is I'll use ownership or agency. And so, in particular, I've talked to a number of guys to sit down and say, look, it's been a man's role to initiate the relationship all the way across, from initiation, conversation, from walking across, leading. And so, when you line all these things up, I mean, there's like 100 steps. I mean, if you really kind of really break it down, it's a man's role all the way up to it.
Yeah.
And as soon as you're in the relationship, all of a sudden it's hers. And my answer is no. That relationship is still the man's, and that is your bus, you're driving, and if she ever reaches for that wheel to grab control of it, your job is to pull that thing over, tell her to sit down, that's not your place, pull over, stop, and if she isn't going to get out.
It's called the captain first mate model.
Yes, and that's another version of it. Yeah, absolutely.
That's the guy, F.K.
Yeah, I haven't read anything, and not only that, because I haven't read it. Is he still producing work, or how's that working?
He's actually gone into the marriage counseling business.
Okay, I would imagine.
And now
so.
He's certifying people with that methodology.
Okay.
I've been following AFOL since like 2011. Okay. He's turning it into a real business, and he's a fully read pill. It's on his blog. The name of his blog is Married Man's Sex Life. Okay. And I know he put the first book out. I know he's probably on his third or fourth at this point.
Okay, good for him.
But that's the captain first mate model in the relationship, because he's happily married and he doesn't want to deal with PUA and seduction and picking up women. But some of the same kinds of things apply. So then in the dating process, a man, as I said in my presentation, he doesn't ask for a date, he states the date. He says, I'm having a great conversation with you. We're going to have a date. Not let's have a date, or do you want a date? We are going to have a date. Are you free Saturday? And that's in the courtship process, that is a very bold, confident maneuver.
Right.
And it shows, leadership in that process.
Now, I've also been told guys to be very wary when they do that. So, for example, I will track, and I did it when I was single with a number of women, but my partner now, I'll track her ovulation cycle.
Oh, no kidding.
Oh, yeah, and here's why. I know that to be dominant just prior to her ovulating is when she's going to respond the best. So I know within that window, I have about a 5 or 6 day window when she really wants Mr. Gray. And, and so, and I don't mean like mean, harsh, but just sort of like, babe, we're going out, we're having Chinese, or get your stuff on, or no, not that dress, not tonight, whatever it is.
You're just young enough so you don't have to worry about this that I do at 54. These young cats, they'll have no clue. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes. But it's interesting, on the back side of the ovulation cycle is when she gets really emotionally based. Okay. And that's when you sit down and say you start being nurturing. That's when I was telling the guys that you come in and say, okay, let's watch a chick flick, or hey honey, what do you want to watch?
I really wish I had this information in my youth, because it would have been.
I'd
still be married.
Let's talk about that. I mean, because a lot of the guys are younger, and a lot of them are really kind of even fixated on the fact that they can't change, that they've got so much personal narrative. They're 22, 23, and they feel they can't change their life. They're who they are. They're fixated in it.
I got a callus older than that.
Yeah, I agree. And the interesting thing is, I try to explain to them that between you and I right now, there's 20 plus years more than your the knowledge of your life that you have, that you could just get to my point, spending 20 years doing marginal things, plus one thing a day. Yeah. And can you talk about what that change for you was like?
It was remarkable. It was not overnight. There was no epiphany. There was no angel visited me at night and hit me with a hammer and said,
"You didn't open the game and that boat just changed your life." Or
no, it wasn't like that. It was a series of small events. It was a series of reading websites, reading stuff that men were dealing with, and then going through my own issues. So it took a good year to year and a half to finally to sort of internalize all this stuff. I resisted it highly in the beginning. I thought this was horseshit. And as I said in the presentation, I thought, there's just no way. Come on.
And that's a common reaction when your belief systems are challenged.
Yeah,
so to reaffirm that belief system.
Right, and it took a long time for me to say, well, wait a minute. And it really did change. I mean, I look at all sorts of stuff. And, I look at actions over words now. I like I said in the presentation, I eavesdrop. I see body language amongst people. And it has been like... a new set of glasses, in effect, or monocle in my case, so that I could see the world differently.
Right.
And that was, but it took a long time. I mean, it was not an overnight procedure. And I was stuck in my ways. I mean, this happened in my 40s. I'm not the young sprightly fellow that I once was.
And I also
now I'm an old sprightly fellow.
Know that when I pick up a new skill, I'm not going to do it well. So to sit down and say, okay, I did what you told me. Well, yeah, you did, but you did it at an amateur level, and somebody I'm trying to emulate is playing.
It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah, and so you have to be kind of consistent at it. I also know that people are trying to rush the process. A lot of times the guys who don't understand it, don't believe it, and I said, okay, fine, let's just go out. You and I are going to sit at a bar or a social environment, and we're going to sit and observe people. And we're going to start saying, let's read body language. What's going on? Who are they?
I've done that exercise.
What's their story? And what happens there is they start realizing there's body language signals. Because when you talk about display language, indicators of interest, they don't understand what those are or what it is. But they can see flirting with other things. Oh, do you see that?
Yeah.
And the next big step was recognizing when she's doing it to me, oh, no, you mean she's really doing it to me, and not having security. I remember the first time I realized that I could count the number of times until I would actually go over and respond, and to sit on it was 8 or 9 indicators deep. And reality, every time a woman's trying to have a bid for your attention and you don't respond, it's kind of a rejection.
Yeah.
And after a while that rejection's hard and she's going to stop.
Right, but the problem is because men and women are so different in terms of our behavior and our perceptions is that you hear women talk, and again, I'm a chronic eavesdropper, and then when a bunch of women are at a table talking at a restaurant, I'm usually within earshot. And they say, it's like, well, I saw this really cute guy at the bar last night or at the meeting or wherever they were at, and I was just keep throwing out so many signals. You talk to the guy, and it's like, what?
Yeah,
what signals?
Yeah.
Right, and so this is the whole men from Mars, women from Venus, that kind of stuff.
But that's cultural training.
Well, see, I would disagree. I would disagree. I would say that it's actually biologically based.
How so?
Well, think about it. This is a common behavior of women that they don't want to be judged, and they want to have respect within the community, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. If she's very sexually aggressive amongst a tribal community, then she can lose respect and status within that community.
I wouldn't say even respect should be attacked.
Yes, it could be.
In an animal world, like let's say a primate world, it would literally be subject to attack.
Right. Well, I'm staying away from the primates. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I got a couple prompts for you guys.
Okay.
But you guys are just on a roll, so I didn't even want to stop you.
This is what happens when we start going. I knew this was going to be a good one.
First thing I got to say is earlier when you guys were talking, somebody asked if Andrew was Socrates' son.
Oh, that's cold.
What piece of shit said that?
That's just cold.
And somebody else said, "Isn't Andrew older than Socrates?" But
that's awesome. Fuck you guys.
Is this too loud? I'll turn it up.
All right, so we got a couple of them. Prompt here, Socrates, you heard something like this yesterday, so this is kind of for Andrew. So if you can go first, and Socrates, if you have a follow-up. Do instincts completely override the changes in technology over the last decade? For example, girls that have much less social skill due to an increase in communication done over text messages instead of in person?
I would say, I don't know if it's on a DNA level yet. I mean, who knows what we're going to evolve into. I don't like this. I don't like the signs. But yes, the use of technology can override on strictly at a behavioral level. I don't know about a DNA level, but yeah, absolutely. We are losing social skills in a major way, men and women alike. This is the biggest complaint that women have about men, and young men have about young women. Is that by using these lovely devices for communication, we do lose some of that. I mean, some of our ability to perceive body language and other things is going to decrease. Social skills are like any skill; you got to practice them.
Yes, I literally ended my speech this go around stating that values accrued by individuals who show up. Prepared, aware, and able to make a difference. And clearly, the digital media and digital social media is affecting our abilities to relate socially. And people that have them are vastly more successful. So, for example, I know a lot of people are using Tinder back and forth to initiate, but what is amazing, if you're going to move from beyond the social media element, you have to be able to engage, in a social construct.
Yeah, I get that question a lot of my blog, and I'll end my response. There's a great website called succeedsocially.com from a Canadian guy for free, and he's really good. And he's got exercises, and he's got essays, and he does this free. It's been around for a long time, and I recommend it highly to everybody. Again, it's a nice free resource. Succeed Socially.
Socially.
Yeah, succeedsocially.com.
All right, I got to follow up for that last one, and then one more question, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay.
So where do you think we are headed? What are your predictions? In 1 minute or less, what are your predictions for socialization of the future? Do you think this is like a short-term gap caused by cell phones? Do you think a new technology in the future might make things better?
And here's my prediction. I'm going to step into the role of a futurist. Have you ever heard of the expression "wet wired"?
No.
Wet wired is right now the human-to-machine interface. I learned this from software development, is limited by the size of our hand. Absolutely true. It's limited by the size of our hand. They can't get much bigger than this. Okay. So what's the next big revolution is going to be where there's going to be an implant in the brain. And I know this because the woman I'm dating actually has cochlear implants for her hearing. We have the technology. It will be embedded directly into the brain. And therefore you can think to change something on your device or to contact with somebody else or whatever. It'll take 50, 60, 100 years to evolve, but that's where it's going to come. Human beings are going to be wet wired into the network, so to speak. So that's
wet
wired
right into the brain.
Yep, wet wired right into the brain. That's what it's called.
My predictions are going to be kind of dire. It's kind of science fiction type stuff. The science fiction is never really rosy. My concerns is that as feminism is more and more ingrained socially and becomes more and more mainstream, matriarchies are not sustainable. And where they are sustainable, they're in mud and grass huts. And so technologically not advancing, they're not supportive. All the things that we know of civilization has been because of patriarchy and families, and particularly husbands and fathers. And when you remove fathers from the equations, you have failed societies. And we have a number of serious examples we can draw upon. And in every instance, violence and poverty and social behavioral disorders go through the roof, and women and children are particularly damaged most by it. And you see male aggression, you see male sexual and physical dimorphisms rise, and it becomes a vastly more violent place. If we don't get a hold of this, if reason and rationality and social connections don't win the argument, the intellectual and behavioral argument, I think we're going to see a society based on those parameters.
All right, and so let's finish up with one last,
Sure.
I don't want to call this an exercise or a question, it's just a thought experiment. So one of the major theses or ideas in your speech earlier, Andrew, was that attraction behaviors specifically are predictable.
Yes.
So Socrates, what I want from you, name some predictable attraction behaviors. Start thinking of as many as you can. And Andrew, I want you to explain evolutionarily how that happened.
All based on fertility.
All based on fertility.
All based on fertility. As I said before, the purpose of human beings is to make more human beings.
So let's test it. Socrates?
You're talking about a confidence behavior. A man saying, "Come here now," or "now," or doing just this. That's a dominant role. And you'll start to see that when I think you brought up earlier cavemanning, when you can kind of hook a girl and kind of bring her in, that sort of thing. Pulling her hair gently, particularly like that. Nibbling on her lip. Those are all response mechanisms. And based on those response mechanisms, you also have genital stimulation. Okay, guys get physically aroused, women will get physically aroused. We can look at studies on rape, where you have a violent action taking place. And why do women orgasm? A third of the time. Now, I'm not saying it's consensual by any stretch of the means. I'm not saying it's not criminal, and it should be absolutely condoned. But these are physiological responses that are not basically negotiated. These are absolutely genetic responses to an event, to stimulation, to being violated. And that is a genetic component. That's not willful behavior.
So cool. Final messages, and then Andrew, I'll let you tell everybody where you're at online.
Sure.
You go first.
You can generally find me either at 21 Universities, any of the videos there, you just look up Socrates, or you can find my blog at manningupsmart.com.
And I am theprivateman.wordpress.com, because I'm a cheapskate. Again, I'm not monetizing it. That's where my blog is. I've been doing it for a long time. I got about 600 blog posts. Whole story of my cancers on there. What else have I got on there? My videos are in there. It's just a free WordPress site, and you can Google The Private Man, and it's number one on the search returns.
Yep, and my goals are typically to help people navigate the sexual marketplace and to understand the values of relationships, relationship skills, maintenance, and repair.
Cool. Thank you so much, guys.
All right, thank you.
Awesome.